So someone asked, they had seen my outfeed table and my table saw setup, and they said, how do you set up the 45 degree? Because there weren't any good videos. So I figured, okay, well, I haven't done any 45-degree cuts, but how hard could it be? Ha! Boy, was that a fun misestimation. So first of all, I had to remove all of this from underneath where I had my 2x4 set up. So this piece was here, and I had to remove all that from up in that section because the motor goes up there. So that's kind of an important thing to not have, run into. So I finally got that sorted out, and I took more than I needed, which that's good because that way there was some airflow. But then it would still only get to 43.5 degrees, and I had one of these Rockler quick connects on there because it fit perfect and sticking out the side when it was at 90 degrees, and I could just reach up under from this side and put the quick connect on, and I was good. And Sawstop sells a panel for way too much money that would attach on this side to connect to, and then has a hose going up. Well, I figured out why they do that, because if you look up in there, that runs right into the base, and it's actually pushing hard against and bending the plastic, kind of running into. So there's no way that I could have this on there because that would be thicker and therefore not allow it to get to 45 degrees. So I'm going to get to have a new project of cut one of my blue hoses and have just a hose clamp on up in there. And then I'm going to make a side panel piece to connect to. So the benefit of that is I'll be able to do 45 degrees now, but then I'll also be able to not have to lean up as far. I can just attach it to the side. I don't have the YouTube chat comment thing in front of me, but thank you for suggesting this because I didn't realize that one, I had messed myself up by putting 2x4s there and the motor needed to go up, and two, this thing doesn't work because it's too thick and it binds. And so that's the new project, is get a piece of hose connected onto there somehow and then come over such that my hose works, and then I'll try and do a 45-degree cut. All right, well, I have my primary hose and then I have my secondary hose. The primary hose I left long. Secondary hose, I trimmed the section off. So this is how long, or I should say, I have a Rockler Quick Connect hose to end piece that I have attached on this end. And on the other end, you can kind of sort of see maybe. I have it, well, not really. That's a pain. Anyway, somewhere up in there, it's connected on the other side. So, yeah, we'll see how that goes. Hopefully that'll work. When I put it on, I had the saw completely over to the 45 side, or I should say I connected the hose to the saw, cranked it to the 45 side so it was the furthest length, stretched it out such that it was here, cut it, spliced, and we should be good. So the one other thing I noticed is because this comes up and there's a capacitor piece right here, this will hit this ledge. So if I'm going to do a 45 cut, I have to move the saw forward such that the saw comes up past this ledge. But otherwise, it should be fine. Again, I've owned the saw for like 2 years now, something like that. Somewhere in there, 1 to 2 years. Time flies. And I've never done a 45-degree cut for a project. So this is just seeing how it would work and now that I know that I needed to tweak things, getting it set up such that I can do it and know the steps. But in any case, I've wanted to do this bottom part for a while because it annoys me every time I have to get down completely under and reach up in and look up under to find where the opening on the saw is. So this will make that a lot easier. I may have to change to something more sturdy than just 2 zip ties or 4 zip ties because the 2 I had were too short. But we'll see. In any case, next we'll get to play with actually using the saw and the 45-degree angle. So these are the clamps since I have the Rockler hose and the Rockler Quick Connects, these are the clamps that I used underneath to attach the section of hose from the saw down to that edge piece that I showed before. And that's also what I have clamping the movable ends onto the end of the hose. So I've played around a little bit more, and initially I was not able to get the silly saw to go to 45 degrees. It would do 44.7, 44.6, and it wouldn't go. And also I noticed that when I cranked it to one direction, it went a little bit past 90. So it actually came up to 90 and then tilted a little bit past. So I looked in the manual, because I have the Sawstop Contractor saw. So on page 66, they have the instructions on making the tilt adjustments to your saw. So there are two little holes here. This is the zero tilt limit, meaning when it's at 90 for the stop, and this is the 45. So what I did was put it up to 90, got my squares, the metal squares, not the plastic squares, and I also have one of these to check the angle. I used this to verify that my square was actually at 90 and at 45 for the metal corner. Checked, verified that the blade was up at 90, adjusted the 0 degree stop so that when you turn the tilt lever, which is this lever on the side here that uses the scale, so when you tilt it or turn it the whole way to one side where it's supposed to be vertical, the stop is now at 90. And then I went the whole way the other direction, and it turns out the stop needed reset slightly to get to 45. So now it's currently showing 0 on camera. So that's at the 90 degree point. And then we crank it and crank it and crank it to the other stop. And we're at 45.1. That's not supposed to be 45.1. So the stops are a little bit fluid, I've noticed. Yeah, see there, with the little bumping, it's 45, 45.1. So without even any other adjustments, it's now at 45. So that's what I had to do to get the blade to go to 45. Next, I have to sort out and make sure that the original insert that has this section that will allow a tilt will work with that. Now, the one thing you have to be careful with these inserts is they are the most stable if you don't run the saw to the entire max height limit. If they're up on the max height limit, you'll run the whole way forward and you'll have less rigidity at the front, and then it may tend to flop more. Most of the time, you're not cutting something that thick anyway at 45 degrees. My next thing is, now that I've gotten the saw to work at 45 degrees, I'm going to put, well, the other thing with this is it actually will cut the hole wider. I think this should be fine, because the reason I say that is I actually bought this one to do the true solid zero clearance, because I was noticing that for small parts, this wide piece at the back would tend to not only flex, but also stuff would want to fall in there if it's a really narrow piece. So I think it'll be fine if I cut this at a 45. These are consumable anyway, realistically. You shouldn't say, oh, they're never supposed to. No, they're consumable. The saw blade hits it, that's a consumable. So I'm going to lower the blade the whole way. Now that I know that 45 degrees works, install this, turn the saw on, slowly raise the blade so it chews its way up through this at 45 if need be, and then we'll go from there. Then we should be able to make some 45 degree cuts. So I decided to try and cut a 45 degree right to the very corner of the board. So I drew that in, and then along the long ways, I figured out how far that was going to be. That was 5.5 inches. So then what I did was that 5.5 inches, that goes from the blade to the fence. So then I can set my fence that far, and then that will cause the blade to work correctly and cut the 45 where I want it. Put my little stops in place, get it all set and ready to go. I really like those mag switch hold pieces because they work really awesome. And look, it's a 45-degree cut. And using my 45-degree square, it was within a tenth of a degree, which I was trying to show there, but didn't go very well. In any case, next, I figured, all right, the best way to show this in a real test is to have two 45s together. So since I already have a board cut to 45, make sure my stop works at 90, and it did, so yay. And set this up and cut the board in half. And once I cut it in half, then I will be able to put the two 45 pieces, which is basically the same piece, together, and it made a really nice miter cut. Of course, I didn't do it right in the center, so that's what happens with the test pieces. So I figured, all right, just showing it real quick isn't going to be a good indicator, so let's try and tape it together. All right, let's set it this way because it's two different sizes were throwing me off initially. But I got the one side taped, and then I looked and, trying to figure out how to get it to show on camera, get my square, and using the square, it's a 90. It's hard to show into this camera that I use, but it worked. So that's cool. And there's lots of other videos that show this, but when you do your measuring of the angle with at least if you're using a metal or plastic angle finder against the blade, do it between the saw teeth, because if you don't, you'll get a false reading. So do it between the teeth in the space in there. That should tell you if you're at 90 degrees or 45 or whatever other angle you're trying to get to. The other thing, at least if you have, I'm assuming most table saws are the same. I don't know for sure. I've only ever had the Sawstop Contractor saw. But with the Sawstop Contractor saw, on these knobs, there's a locking nut in the center. That's also how if you completely take that off, you can remove the knob or install it. So once you get the angle set, make sure it's set and then lock the locking knob so that the angle doesn't change. That way, if you bump the blade with the board or something, you're not going to have a chance of getting your angle to change. So once you have all that sorted, what I did was, I'm fairly certain I explained it sufficiently before, but in case it wasn't clear, once you determine where you want the saw to cut, measure between one end and the bottom of the cut, or in this case, since the saw tilts on mine in this direction, measure between the edge of your board and where you want the bottom of that angle to be. And for me, that was the value that I used to set the right hand fence indicator. Then when that cut, as it showed on the video, it cut right along the very edge of the board, which is what I wanted. And the distance between here and here was 5.5 inches. And then what I did was, as I showed, cut it in half to try and make a 90 degrees just to do a test, because there's no sense doing an angle if you don't do a test. And you can see here the angle is closed and we have a 90 degrees. So this is right up against the square. The pieces of wood are together tight. And we got a 90. So that means we should have a nice 45. So hopefully that was useful. Again, each saw may or may not have some slight differences in how you do the setup, so definitely check your manual. Because initially I didn't realize I had not set up I thought I had run through the steps when I initially got the saw, but obviously I either missed or the stops moved over time for the 90 and 45. But the manual did say 0 for mine, 45. That adjusts the stops, and then now I cranked it to the stop on the 45-degree angle. That's when it cut this, and the cut shows it's a nice 45. So hopefully that was helpful.